Hey, I'm Caleb with YouCanMakeThisToo. This video I'm going to be making some epoxy cutting boards, and with Christmas coming up, I actually have these and some other cutting boards available for sale on my website, and this month's Patreon contest prize is the Rigid Octane Jigsaw. If you're interested in those things, information's in the description. Otherwise, stick with me and I'll show you how you can make this too.
My joiner was out of commission when I started working on these, and the wood I'm using has some twist, so I improvised a planer sled to get them flat. I just used a large flat board that I had laying around and some craft sticks with hot glue to balance the twist and secure the board before running it through the planer. Once the top came out of the planer flat, I could take everything off the sled and then run the other face through the planer. Then I cut off the ends that have some checking. I left it long in case I had any snipe at the planer. Next up is removing the bark. Leaving it on would be cool, but I'm afraid the bark might not be attached strong enough, and I don't want this breaking in half, so I'm going to take it off. A draw knife makes pretty quick work of it, but it's not the only tool you can use. A chisel works pretty well too. Really, just, use whatever you've got. You do you. I'm going to stick with the draw knife though.
Now that I've got these milled, I can start breaking them down into the sections that'll become the boards. Probably get 3 out of this one, maybe 4 out of this one.
I measure and mark out the boards to about equal lengths. Everything at this point is still rough measurements. I use a square just to be able to strike straight lines to follow, but there's really nothing to be square to at this point. I used the jigsaw to break down the boards. There's likely going to be some tension in these, and the jigsaw is the least likely saw to bind or kick back, so it's the safest. To mark the middle of these boards, I like to stand up my straight edge on edge to find the middle, then lay it down and mark it. Because my straight edge is so wide, if I just lay it down, it kind of plays tricks on my eyes and makes it really hard to fairly accurately find the middle. A track saw or table saw jig are 2 ways to get a really clean split on these boards. I don't have those though, so I'm going to do another rough split and clean it up. There's lots of tool options for that, just do what works for you. After I cut the first one, I realize I probably should mark the boards so I don't get them all mixed up, so I do that and then cut the rest in half.
And whichever method you use, it's unlikely to come out flat. As you can see, mine aren't perfectly flat, so that's next, is getting a flat surface there, just like milling anything. Now that one side's flat, it's a lot easier to see how unflat the other side is. And I know not everyone has hand planes, so if you don't, just come over to your 1890s really rare jointer with absurdly expensive Sheelix cutter head. Spray down some glue, lay out your sandpaper, because this is a nice flat surface. PPE, and get it flat that way.
Now that I have a straight edge to reference, I'll cut the ends of the boards square to the straight line down the middle and to length.
So off camera I set this up. It looks like a lot, but it's really pretty simple, and if you've seen epoxy pours, this is nothing new. I've just got some plywood that I use, a bunch of tuck tape. Any really good tape is gonna work fine because the epoxy doesn't stick to it. And the idea is just a non-stick surface so you can actually get your pieces out. I made a compartment for each board, and I didn't do a good job measuring, so I've kind of got this extra area here. And to make sure everything is holding down okay, I had one of these, I think it's actually soap making silicone molds that I pour excess epoxy into, and as you can see I cut that up, and that just gives me something to push my clamp to, but this is covered in silicone which the epoxy isn't going to stick to, so I have something to help give some downward pressure to make sure my stock doesn't float up but also isn't going to stick to the epoxy. So now it's just time to mix it up and pour. One note on the construction of this, you can see that I obviously taped all the surfaces. For these kind of pieces, I would tape the bottom and then run a piece on the top. But after I assembled it all, I made sure to tape all the joints as well to just make this as tight as possible. The last thing I want is you know, half a gallon of epoxy leaking everywhere. And for this, I'm using Total Boat Thick Set. Of course, they're the sponsor for the video. I've got a discount code in the description if you want to check that out. And this is a 3-to-1. So that's how we're gonna mix it. 3 parts of this to 1 part of hardener. Now we just stir forever, and I should be wearing a respirator. You should wear a respirator if you do this too. A nice thing about working with these thick set deep pour epoxies is it's not a race against the clock like normal 2-to-1, even in these larger batches. If I was doing like some regular 2-to-1, I'd be really worried about this kicking off on me. And you can see I already kind of have staged what I'm gonna do, so I mix this up. Not really sure how much I'm gonna need, so I'm just gonna play it by ear. I could have done all the math, but that would be math. So instead of that, I just have a bunch mixed up here, and I'll pour it off, mix up my colors as I go, and if I run out, I'll just mix up some more. And I'm not gonna go crazy with my pigment because I want this to be kind of translucent, not a solid opaque. There we go. I like that. Could have gotten away with a little less pigment, but it's pretty deep in here. Once I pour it out, it should be a little bit more translucent. All right, I'm just gonna start on the first one. I've got about 10 ounces in here. That's just a reference for when I do the others, how much to separate. I'll see how far this goes. And these cups are really handy because they give you all the different ratio measurements. Anyway, let's see how this goes, and hopefully nothing leaks. Okay, yeah, that got me about halfway to where I need. So I'm gonna mix up another 10 and see how that goes. Okay, I poured another 10 ounces out, added pigment, and I went a little heavier on the pigment this time because that's a little more translucent than I want. So let's see how this goes. Okay, getting close to the top, so I might need just a little bit more. Yeah, I think I need a little bit more. I'll just go ahead and finish this off. But Memphis, I'm in Memphis, and Memphis colors are blue and white, so I'm going to add a little bit of white to this and try to mix that in, see how that goes. There we go, and this just started cresting, so that's perfect. Get some shape to it. And yeah, I kind of like where that goes. Kind of dip and pull. Cool. All right, that one's done. Okay, see this? This isn't cool. I'm worried. I got some drips, so time to add more tape quickly. So while thick set epoxies have their merits, like being able to release the air bubbles, head off gas, and being able to pour thick and not having to do a bunch of thin pours, the other downside is if you have anywhere it can leak out, it will, because it's not going to set up quick. So it'll just find all those little places and just seep out. All right, crisis averted. I think I've got the dripping stopped. Bad news is I used all this up, which when I realized that first one took 22-ish ounces, there wasn't going to be enough. All I had left in here was 11. I've got 2 more to go. They're a little bit bigger, so I'm going to go ahead and mix up another batch. Start with 20. This one I'm going to do green. This is emerald green. Yeah, this is a nice rich color that I think will go with the air-dried walnut very nicely. This one will be a little bit easier. I'm not going to do any color mixing. that deeper, add some more pigment. Yeah, it's hard to know how much pigment to add because it looks a lot darker in my container because it's deeper, and when it goes in here and it's not quite as thin, you know, then it's not as vibrant. Oh shoot, looks like we're just a touch low. Add just a little bit more. And I think that's good. And for my last one, I'm gonna experiment, do a mix. I've got this Diamond Deep Sea Blue, which is a really nice deep blue. Use a lot of it. Kind of got a little bit better idea how much pigment to use. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of this Diamond Battleship Gray. And I'm not gonna entirely mix this so it goes through. I want to keep it kind of streaky, so. And now the last pour. Yeah, and I can just kind of detect the gray sparkle in there, subtle, very nice, I like it. Now, I guess we just come back in 3 days and hopefully it's not all over my floor. And if you're wondering about this, this is a coffee table top for a coffee table I'm making. That's a collaboration with Richard from 42 Fab, who is an awesome metal fabricator we're gonna be getting together soon on this. So if you wanna catch that video and see what this looks like, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. And this is part of my new living room suite, which is also gonna include a cool couch and console table. Let me give you a teaser on that couch. This is where I am on that couch. These are the side pieces. We've got this really cool orange heart pinstriping going on. If you wanna see how this comes together, you know what to do.
The boards I have had a few days to cure, so it's time to take them out of the mold. Using the epoxy pieces and the silicone worked great to hold down the boards. You can see how they didn't stick at all. So now for lots of unscrewing and pounding this apart, hopefully without ruining the boards. The tuck tape worked amazingly well and none of the epoxy stuck to it at all. Getting the boards loose from the bottom was a little tricky. They'd formed a vacuum lock or something and were really stuck on there good. I didn't want to pound directly on the boards, so I tried hanging the plywood off the edge of the vents and then hitting the plywood to make it bend and break the seal, and that worked really effectively. I slightly overfilled the epoxy, so to flatten the boards back down, I send them through my drum sander. It's important to go slow with really light passes because sanding builds up a lot of heat, and when the epoxy gets hot, it just turns into a gummy mess that clogs and ruins the paper, and changing this paper is a pain. In hindsight, it would have been better to slightly underfill the void and then sand the wood down to level with the epoxy instead of overfilling and sanding the epoxy, because the wood sands faster and easier, but lessons learned.
Sanding was so monotonous, I forgot to bring you guys along for the ride. So with the sanding, I was able to get all the extra epoxy off the top and bottom and get them nice and flat. But from the molds, there was epoxy all the way around the sides. So I used the table saw to get everything off the sides, but they're still on the ends. So I'm gonna go to the
For an edge treatment on these, I used a 45-degree chamfer bit in my router table. This could also be done freehand or with a hand plane. The epoxy actually routed really nice. I've had good luck avoiding blowout on the corners by routing the long grain first and then doing end grain, but always be very careful routing end grain. Off camera, I wet the boards to pop the grain, and once they dried, I sanded them with 220 on the random orbit sander. Then I switched to micromesh pad kit and I run through all of the grits of that on the epoxy to polish it up. And as I go, you can see how the epoxy gets clearer. The last step before oiling is branding them with my commission brand, which is the Custom Furniture Guy, because YouCanMakeThisToo doesn't really sell pay me to do it for you. And now the most satisfying part, the mineral oil bath. I'll shut up and let you enjoy it. And as a bonus for sticking around, here's some oiling shots of other cutting boards I made. Don't forget that I have these available for sale on my website and the holidays are coming up. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, learned something, or were at least entertained. Until next time, make time to make something.